He walked into the inferno to save lives, but that same fire swallowed him whole. And for the past 12 years, no one has known where he went. On the night of June 27, 2011, thick black smoke billowed from an abandoned warehouse in the Western Industrial District of Atlanta, tearing through the night sky with bursts of fiery red sparks. The wailing of fire truck sirens echoed across rows of long deserted factories as the trucks screeched to a halt. Firefighters leapt out in a rush, red and blue lights flashing across their faces, turning them into flickering shadows moving through the sea of smoke. Among them, one man stood out: James Coleman, 27 years old, the youngest black firefighter on duty that night, who had just been named Firefighter of the Month a week earlier. James grew up in Westview, a neighborhood so rough, even delivery drivers hesitated to enter after dark. But to his mother, Marlene, James was her only son, whom she raised on the night shifts of a nursing job, on sleepless nights and simple meals in their old apartment. When James stepped into the warehouse with his hose, the flames had already engulfed piles of scrap, and toxic smoke from old chemicals reduced visibility to just a few feet. Over the radio, James' voice came through, hurried but steady. "Is anyone still inside? I'm checking the corners." That was the last thing he ever said. 45 minutes later, once the fire was finally under control, every firefighter had made it out safely, but James was nowhere to be found. The next morning, the tracking device attached to James' air tank was discovered intact, lying on the floor of the fire truck. There was no body, no helmet, not a single trace among the charred remains. It was as if he had never been inside that fire at all. But if James never made it into the flames, then where did he disappear to? And why? After 12 long years, has no one been able to find him? James Coleman was born on a sweltering summer afternoon in 1984 at Grady Memorial Hospital, his first cries echoing amid the wailing sirens of ambulances weaving through the streets of Atlanta from the moment he arrived. James was a special child, with bright brown eyes filled with a curiosity that never seemed to fade. His mother, Marlene Coleman, just 20 at the time, carried him out of the delivery room alone. The child's father, nowhere in sight. Their life together began in a ground-floor apartment in Westview, a neighborhood where stray gunshots at night were a grim reminder that they lived in one of Atlanta's toughest areas. From an early age, James watched his mother juggle countless jobs, night shifts as a nurse at the local clinic, part-time work as a school cafeteria cook, cleaning floors at a corner store. Each morning, he'd sit by the window, eyes wide as a bright red fire truck sped by, its sirens drowning out every other sound in the neighborhood. In those moments, James' gaze lit up with a dream he couldn't yet put into words, a longing to become a hero, someone brave enough to run into danger to save lives. At 10 years old, James started waking up early to help his mother cook breakfast. Some nights, Marlene would come home in her blood-stained nurse's uniform, so exhausted she'd fall asleep right there on the sofa. On those nights, James would gently drape a blanket over her shoulders before quietly cleaning up their tiny kitchen. It was this quiet love that shaped him into a young man who was compassionate, resilient, and unafraid of hardship or injustice. James's middle school teacher still remembered the boy who always stood up for classmates who were bullied, even when facing kids much bigger than his 12-year-old self. In his high school yearbook, James wrote, "I want to be a firefighter, because they don't just put out flames, they save dreams still waiting to come true." That single line brought many to tears, coming from a boy born in a place where few believed dreams like his could survive. At 17, James witnessed his first fire, a blaze that broke out in the apartment building next door. Without hesitation, he ran into the night, banging on doors to wake neighbors before firefighters arrived. That night's fire consumed 3 apartments, but thanks to James' courage, no lives were lost. Police documented his actions in their neighborhood report, and Marlene watched her son standing under the flashing red and blue lights. Realizing he had found his life's purpose, James grew up navigating narrow alleys lined with cracked, graffiti-covered walls, and evenings when his mother warned him to avoid corners where groups of men gathered. But instead of fear, He found life in every part of his crowded neighborhood, the thumping beat of rap music from upstairs apartments, the sweet smell of pastries sold by Mrs. Johnson, the giggles of children playing on the cracked sidewalks, to James. Westview wasn't a ghetto, it was home, a place where everyone had a story worth hearing. At 19, James was determined to apply to the Atlanta Fire Academy. Even though his grades barely met the requirements, his application nearly got rejected because of his absent father and a home address in a neighborhood flagged for high crime. But during the interview, the recruitment officer was struck by James's account of rescuing his neighbors that night and the unshakable resolve in his eyes. That day, James was accepted, becoming one of only 3 black cadets in his class. Training at the academy was anything but easy. James had to double his efforts just to keep up physically with his peers. Learning to stay calm while climbing high-rise stairwells weighed down by a 45-pound air tank. Some days had collapsed from exhaustion. Some nights, he'd sit alone in the dorm, calloused hands clutching a photo of his mother, reminding himself he couldn't give up. Over time, James rose to the top of his class. He was always the last to leave the training grounds, eager to help fellow cadets repair equipment or practice breathing techniques in heavy smoke. The head instructor still remembered James' words, "A firefighter is just strong, they have to be kind, because the people we rescue are putting their lives in our hands." That quote was engraved on the Academy's Wall of Honor as a lasting reminder to generations to come. After graduation, James was assigned to Station 17, right in Westview's own childhood neighborhood. His colleagues described him as the guy who always smiled, even on the roughest overnight shifts. Always willing to swap shifts so coworkers with young kids could stay home. During team drills, he was known for his infectious enthusiasm, encouraging everyone with his favorite line, "We don't just save lives, we save the hopes," teetering on the edge of despair. By 27, James had been named Firefighter of the Month after rescuing 2 children from an apartment fire in Vine City. He proudly brought the award home to show his mother, and Marlene wept with joy, knowing her son had surpassed every limitation once placed on a boy from Westview. On June 22, 2011, James's shift began like any other. He brewed coffee, joked with his team, and shared plans to swing by his mother's bakery that evening to pick up some cookies she'd just perfected. No one imagined those simple conversations would be the last time they'd hear his easy laughter. Around 9:58 p.m., dispatch received an emergency call. A massive fire had broken out in an abandoned warehouse on Fairbanks Avenue, in Atlanta's western industrial zone. Fanned by strong winds, the flames spread quickly, sending thick black smoke towering high above the rooftops. When the fire trucks arrived at 10:11, the warehouse was already an inferno. The glow of the blaze painted the concrete walls a hellish red, casting apocalyptic shadows on the surrounding buildings. James's team split into 2 groups. One worked to contain the fire from the outside, while the other prepared to search the interior for possible squatters, rumored to use the warehouse as shelter. James was the first to volunteer, hauling the heavy fire hose as his tall, athletic frame slipped into the swirling smoke. A witness, Walter, a security guard at the warehouse across the street, recalled seeing James and his team rush inside. But just minutes later, a small explosion shook the warehouse doors violently, and then there was silence, broken only by the roar of the fire. One by one, James's teammates staggered out, overcome by heat and smoke, but James was missing. At first, they thought he'd gotten turned around in the chaos, but even after the fire was under control 45 minutes later, there was still no sign of him. 3 days later, rescue crews painstakingly combed through the debris, desperate to find his body or at least a clue, a scrap of fabric, a helmet, an air tank. But there was nothing. Even stranger, James's tracking device, supposed to be attached to his air tank at all times, was discovered intact inside the fire truck, as if someone had deliberately left it there. That unsettling detail sparked whispers among the crew if James had somehow escaped the collapsing warehouse. Could someone have taken him in the confusion? One firefighter remembered seeing a black SUV idling at the far end of the street, leading into the industrial zone, but in the chaos, No one paid it any mind. They were focused on the fire, on their missing brother. And as the night passed, James Coleman vanished, as if he had never existed at all. As soon as the fire was brought under control at 10:56 p.m., the entire team split up to search through the charred ruins of the warehouse. Every step across the rubble, every metallic clink of warped, burned steel echoed like a desperate call for James. Lingering smoke made everyone cough and their eyes sting. But they didn't stop. One by one, his fellow firefighters shone their flashlights into every gap between scorched wooden pallets, checked every collapsed steel shelf. None of them could believe James could have died inside the warehouse without leaving a single trace. Throughout the night, the radio crackled non-stop. James. Respond, James. Where are you? Voices thick with worry rang out into the dark, empty warehouse. But only silence replied. They searched until dawn, bodies pushed to exhaustion, some firefighters collapsing on their trucks from sheer fatigue. The next morning, the city's professional rescue team took over the scene. They used thermal scanners, ground-penetrating radar, and search dogs, but the result was the same nothing. The fire had been so intense that many parts of the warehouse were twisted and inaccessible. But even in areas where the structure remained intact, there was no sign of James. Atlantis newspapers quickly picked up the story "Firefighter Missing in the Line of Duty," featuring a black and white photo of James in his uniform, eyes steady and resolute as he looked into the camera. In Westview, his childhood neighborhood, residents gathered in prayer circles right on the street outside his mother Marlene's bakery, even those with no faith at all. To them, James symbolized a son who had risen above hardship, a point of pride for their entire community. On the morning of the third day after the fire, police and fire officials announced they were suspending the search, having found no sign that James was alive or that his remains were in the debris. This decision was met with fierce outrage from his family and the community. His mother, Marlene, appeared before local news cameras, her voice hoarse from sleepless nights. How can my son disappear in front of dozens of fellow firefighters in a fire everyone saw? I need answers. I need the truth. On the fifth day after James went missing, just as public interest began to fade, an unexpected development reignited hope. A city sanitation worker cleaning along the road leading away from the industrial zone discovered a charred firefighting glove with J. Coleman stitched on the wrist. The glove was lying in a patch of roadside weeds, nearly half a mile from the warehouse. News of the discovery spread quickly, and firefighters and police swarmed the area, hoping James had escaped the fire, injured but alive and trying to find help. But an extensive search around the glove's location turned up nothing. Even more troubling, the only footprints found in the damp soil nearby were from shoes that didn't match James's size, proving someone else had been there. This chilling detail shifted the investigation onto a new path, the possibility of third-party involvement. At the same time, technicians retrieved GPS data from James's phone. They uncovered a shocking clue at 11:18 p.m., the night of the fire. More than an hour after he vanished, James's phone signaled movement heading northwest, away from the nearest hospital. The GPS signal grew weaker before disappearing entirely near the old steel bridge spanning the Chattahoochee River, a known shortcut out of Atlanta. The fact that his phone traveled after his disappearance stunned investigators. If James was injured, why wasn't he taken straight to a hospital? James's family no longer believed this was simply an accident in the fire. Marlene hired a private investigator, Luther Gray, a well-known retired police officer, to conduct an independent inquiry. In his report to her, Gray wrote, based on all available data, "I believe the most likely scenario is that James left the fire scene alive, but who took him and why remain the big questions." In an emotional radio interview, Marlene's voice broke as she shared, "I don't believe my son died in that fire. If it was hot enough to erase every trace, how did his team survive? Why is it only James who's missing?" Her questions became the community's questions, reigniting media attention on the mysterious disappearance a week after the fire. A sudden summer downpour swept through Atlanta. Rainwater rushing along the city's gray streets revealed something that left everyone stunned. a black firefighter's boot, clearly stamped with J. Coleman, caked in mud and streaked with dried blood turned a dark brown. The boot was found under the Fairbanks Bridge, nearly a mile from the warehouse, where the Chattahoochee River curved past an abandoned container yard. Preliminary analysis confirmed the blood on the boot matched James's blood type. This was the first concrete evidence that he had made it out of the warehouse and had even traveled a significant distance afterward. But this revelation also spread a chilling fear through the fire department if James got out. Who or what intercepted him afterward? Forensic analysis of the dirt stuck to the boot found a mix of sand and industrial gravel, a blend typical of the deserted construction sites along the riverbank places where someone could easily hide an injured person, or worse. The discovery of the boot rekindled media frenzy. Reporters crowded the fire department, firing off questions. Was James kidnapped? Why did his phone move before going dark? Is the fire department hiding something city officials were forced to hold a press conference to calm the storm, insisting there is no evidence at this time indicating a criminal act? But James' family and the Westview community no longer believed vague reassurances. Meanwhile, James' fellow firefighters were thrown into turmoil. Whispers spread about recent tensions within the team, about James openly criticizing budget cuts to protective gear, about his relentless insistence that every firefighter be fully equipped for every call. These rumors planted seeds of doubt in the community. Could James's integrity have made him a target for someone wanting to silence him? Yet no one dared make definitive accusations. They only knew one heartbreaking truth: James, the brave firefighter beloved by an entire neighborhood, stepped into the fire on a mission to save lives, and for 12 long years since, he has never returned. For months after James disappeared, the case seemed to slip into silence. But then, from within the fire department itself, conflicting accounts began to leak out. The first to speak was Terrence Hill, a 32-year-old firefighter and longtime colleague of James. In a private meeting with investigator Luther Gray, Terrence revealed that, on the night of the fire, he'd heard a brief cry for help coming from deep inside the warehouse, just as the team was ordered to evacuate because of a collapsing roof risk. He insisted the voice was unmistakably James, but when Terrence shouted into the radio, "I hear James," the shift commander, Lieutenant Harris, immediately barked back, "Pull out now. That could be an echo or a falling debris. No, one goes back in." Terrence said that after evacuating, he and a few others tried to re-enter to look for James, but Harris threatened them with suspension if they disobeyed. During the subsequent search, they were ordered not to mention having heard James's voice. Terrence recalled that days later, after he casually told another firefighter about what he'd heard, he received an anonymous phone call that night. "Keep your mouth shut if you don't want your career ruined." Terrified, Terrence chose silence. Then came another witness, Angela Torres, a cashier at a gas station less than a kilometer from the warehouse. She swore that around 11:15 p.m. that night, she saw a black SUV speed past her store with a strange flickering light inside, like a firefighter's flashlight. Angela remembered it vividly because the SUV screeched its tires on the wet road, leaving a sharp smell of burnt rubber. When news broke of James's disappearance, she called the police hotline, but no one ever followed up. These accounts began aligning with the discovered glove, the boot, and the phone's GPS signal. Detective Luther Gray concluded the data and witnesses suggest James made it out of the warehouse, possibly injured, and was forced to move. But the key question is why, and who had the means to do that right under the noses of police and firefighters? The testimonies from Terrence and Angela pushed Luther to dig deeper into the fire department's internal dynamics. He uncovered that just weeks before James vanished, James had filed an official report with headquarters, warning that outdated protective equipment, especially air tanks, hadn't been replaced as required, putting firefighters' lives at risk. James had kept a copy of that report locked in his personal locker at the fire station, but when Luther asked to access James's locker, he was told all of James' belongings had been turned over to his family just a week after the fire. Yet Marlene, James' mother, insisted she only received a few uniforms and a spare helmet. There was no sign of any paperwork. The critical report exposing equipment issues had vanished. Luther also uncovered another oddity. The official night shift log for the night of the fire had been altered. In James's initial handwritten entry, it said, on scene at 10:11 p.m., but the archived official record showed on scene at 10:25 p.m., creating a 14-minute gap. This discrepancy raised the possibility someone had intentionally created a time window, perhaps to hide James's departure or abduction from the fire. The irregularities didn't stop there. Another firefighter on duty that night, Daniel Roberts, shared that just a day before the fire. James had a heated argument with a department superior after objecting to new rescue equipment being reassigned to another station. Leaving Station 17 with outdated gear, James had insisted, "I won't let my brothers die," because someone wants to save a few bucks. His words chilled the room, and Roberts recalled the cold, hostile looks some higher-ups shot at James, silent threat, mounting tensions within the department, missing documents, manipulated timestamps together. These painted an increasingly dark picture of what might have led to James' disappearance. But the most disturbing question was this: if this had been just a tragic accident, why were there so many details in need of covering up pressure from James's family, the Westview community, and the media finally forced local police to expand the official investigation? They began reviewing security camera footage around the industrial area and the Fairbanks Bridge, but were hampered by the fact that most public cameras near the warehouses had been broken or out of service before the fire. Yet one privately owned camera at a nearby machine shop captured blurry footage of a black SUV driving in the opposite direction of the incoming fire trucks right before the police blocked off the area. The SUV had distinctive features: a cracked left taillight and chipped paint on the right side matching Angela Torres' description. But the license plate was unreadable, obscured by smoke and the fire's glare. Still, police were forced to admit at least one vehicle not belonging to emergency services had been at the scene, moving near the warehouse in the time frame of James' disappearance. Meanwhile, forensic tests on the boot found under the bridge confirmed the dried blood inside matched James's blood type. Soil particles inside the boot contained microscopic flecks of gray industrial paint consistent with the paint used on the warehouse floor and container yards near the Fairbanks Bridge. This bolstered the theory that James had been taken out of the warehouse, injured, and was present near the bridge area before vanishing completely. The truth was slowly coming to light, but it also sparked growing dread, because if James escaped the fire alive, who had taken him, whoever it was? They had moved quickly, silently, right in the middle of a chaotic scene crawling with police and firefighters. James's family began to suspect a carefully orchestrated scheme, someone who knew exactly how to exploit an emergency and how to remove a person without drawing notice. As police announced they would continue the investigation, journalists started uncovering troubling stories about the fire department's leadership. Investigative reports highlighted a history of murky financial practices, delayed equipment purchases, and mismanaged safety budgets. James' name now appeared not just in news segments about his disappearance, but also as a symbol of the fight for the right of firefighters to have the safety gear they need, men and women who risk their lives every day to protect their communities. As the investigation entered its second month, Detective Luther Gray received an anonymous call from a low, gravelly male voice that refused to identify itself. The caller uttered just one sentence: "Want to know what happened to James? Look into the black SUV registered to Citywide Services." Then the line went dead, and the number couldn't be traced. The name Citywide Services immediately set off alarm bells for Luther. This was the city's longtime contractor for fire safety systems maintenance in dozens of municipal buildings, including fire stations themselves. His investigation revealed that Citywide Services operated a fleet of black SUVs used to transport equipment, one of which matched the description of the vehicle seen near the warehouse on the night James disappeared. But Citywide was a trusted partner of city officials, with many high-ranking fire department officers having worked directly with them over the years. The company's records stretched hundreds of pages, yet showed no suspicious transactions. Everything appeared perfectly in order, almost too perfect, like someone had scrubbed it clean. Luther went to the Citywide lot, where the SUVs were parked each night, when he asked a security guard about the SUV with the cracked taillight. The guard awkwardly admitted it had been repainted and the taillight replaced just 2 weeks earlier, immediately after the fire. The repair paperwork was thorough, but seemed rushed, as if someone was desperate to erase all traces. chillingly. The date the SUV was serviced matched exactly with when James's boot was found near the bridge. This frightening coincidence raised a harrowing question for Luther. Had someone used the chaos of the fire to abduct James, then hurriedly covered it up by fixing the vehicle and scrubbing away blood or other evidence? But the bigger question loomed: why? What motive was worth taking such a colossal risk, digging deeper? Luther uncovered a key detail in Citywide's accounting records. A large payment, nearly $300,000, had been wired to a mysterious personal account just 2 weeks before the fire. This account belonged to a shell company supposedly selling used firefighting gear, but which had no storefront or legitimate business activity. Comparing documents, Luther found the registered agent for this shell company was none other than the brother-in-law of Lieutenant Harris, the officer who commanded the shift the night James vanished. That revelation shattered any illusion that James' disappearance was just an accident. If new equipment was being siphoned off for profit, forcing crews to use outdated, dangerous gear, then James, who had been determined to expose it, would have been a serious threat. His personnel records showed he had emailed the department's administrative office 3 times, attaching evidence of substandard equipment and requesting an independent inspection. None of those reports were ever answered, nor were they among the documents returned to his family. Another troubling detail emerged when Luther checked the station's electronic timekeeping logs. They showed James clocked out at 11:12 p.m., over an hour after he was supposedly trapped in the warehouse. Yet the station's security cameras were conveniently out of order that night, recording nothing, while each glitch could have been random. Their repetition increasingly suggested a deliberate effort to erase James' final movements. When Luther presented these findings to Marlene, she nearly collapsed. Her tears no longer fell from fear of her son's death, but from the crushing realization that James might have been betrayed by those sworn to protect him for years. She'd believed justice would come on its own, but the deeper she dug, the clearer it became that only her determination could uncover the truth about James. In the days after suspicions around citywide services came to light, the atmosphere at Station 17 grew suffocating. Younger firefighters whispered about secret meetings where superiors warned them not to speak with reporters or the family's investigator. Fear spread through the station, turning brothers in arms into shadows, avoiding each other in the hallways. Meanwhile, the media began exploring the theory that James was sacrificed to protect a sprawling embezzlement scheme. A wave of investigative articles examined contracts for firefighting equipment in West Atlanta, revealing a pattern of wrongdoing: refurbished old gear sold at new equipment prices, falsified inspection reports, and large, unexplained expenses. James was not the first to raise concerns, but it appeared he was the first to insist on gathering irrefutable evidence. Then came a bombshell. Luther tracked down an old friend of James's who worked as an insurance adjuster, specializing in evaluating firefighting equipment. This friend confirmed that James had asked him, just days before the fire, for advice on proving equipment didn't meet safety standards in his last text message to his friend. James wrote, "I won't let anyone else in our team die because of this. They have to be held accountable." That message was ignored in the original investigation, dismissed as unrelated to the fire. Every night, Marlene sat at the window of the small apartment she once shared with her son, staring out at the darkening streets of Westview, where James had dreamed of being a hero. Each distant wail of a fire truck siren made her heart clench. Torn between hope for a miracle and terror at the reality that 12 years had passed with no word from her son, she whispered into the night, "You wanted to save everyone, but who will save you now?" James. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. James' bravery wasn't only in running into burning buildings, but in daring to challenge a broken system. And it was that very courage that may have led him into the shadows, where the truth remains buried, along with the painful guilt of those left behind. Nearly a year after James disappeared, police officially closed the case, categorizing it as an unexplained missing person. Their final report simply concluded the victim may have perished in the fire. No remains were recovered. This swift closure enraged James's family and the Westview community. No one could understand how dozens of eyewitness accounts, GPS data, and clear evidence were brushed aside so quickly, as if they meant nothing, just when all hope seemed to be fading. Detective Luther Gray received a clandestine meeting request from an anonymous source. The man turned out to be a former Citywide Services employee who had worked maintaining the SUVs the night of the fire. He confessed that immediately after the blaze. One SUV was driven into the garage caked with mud, its back seat stained with small spots of blood. When he asked about it, his supervisor snapped, "Keep your mouth shut if you want to keep your job," the very next day. The SUV was rushed in for repainting, while the man hadn't seen James himself. His testimony confirmed that at least one citywide vehicle had signs of transporting someone injured or worse. Meanwhile, an internal audit by the fire department revealed multiple reports of faulty equipment had been removed from archives, and some key documents had simply vanished. Even records of James's requests for an independent safety inspection were missing entirely. When these facts leaked, many began to wonder, had someone planned to silence James all along, with the fire providing the perfect opportunity to make him disappear at a Westview community meeting? Marlene stood before hundreds of residents, her voice ragged. "Everyone calls my son a hero, but if the system turns its back, will any heroes dare to speak up again?" Her question cut through the crowd like a knife, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. Growing public outrage, fueled by investigative reports, pushed James's disappearance back into the spotlight. Media outlets across Georgia began questioning the competence and transparency of the Atlanta Fire Department. In television interviews, James' former colleagues either refused to comment or repeated the same rehearsed line, "We did everything we could." Those robotic answers only deepened suspicions, because everyone knew the truth rested with those who had been there that night. For James' family, the blood-stained boot haunted them most. It was the only tangible proof he might have made it out alive, injured, and then vanished. Marlene kept it in a glass case near her front door, a constant reminder of the injustice that still lingered. She told reporters, "As long as I'm alive, I will keep looking for James." That simple, heartbreaking vow was replayed on local news broadcasts, stirring fear in many that anyone could disappear if they dared expose the truth. In a final attempt, Luther sent all the evidence he had collected to a team of attorneys specializing in public corruption cases. They pledged to take the case to federal court if more witnesses came forward. But 12 years had passed. Memories had faded. Evidence was lost or destroyed, and potential witnesses grew more fearful by the day, acutely aware of the power held by those determined to bury the truth. Amid this crisis of faith, the Westview community refused to let James's story die. They continued to gather for candlelight vigils, not only praying for his return, but reaffirming to one another that truth, justice, and faith in what's right still existed, even if fragile. Each flickering candle became a silent promise whispered into the night. "James, we have never forgotten you." 12 years have passed since the night James stepped into the flames, yet Marlene Coleman's old apartment remains exactly as it was when he was still there. His favorite ceramic mug still sits on the dining table. The chair where he used to lean back and gaze out at the street hasn't moved an inch. Marlene has never changed a thing, because for her, it's the only way to keep the warmth of her son alive. Friends and neighbors have urged her countless times to leave Westview, to start a new life elsewhere. But she always shakes her head softly. "James wouldn't know where to find me if I left." Every year on James' birthday, she sets a small cake by the window and waits until midnight, praying for a miracle that might bring him home, but only the distant wails of passing sirens, the muffled laughter of teenagers drifting up from the street, and the gnawing loneliness keep her company night after night. She pores over the case files, reading and rereading the final report that closed his case with the words missing under unknown circumstances, wondering how many people knew the truth but chose to stay silent. James's story spread beyond the borders of Westview, becoming a painful warning about the hidden dangers faced by those brave enough to speak the truth. Yet it also became a source of inspiration for the neighborhood's youth. Many students began dreaming of becoming firefighters, like James, not just to fight fires, but to be the kind of person who stands up against what's wrong. They see him as a symbol of courage, of rare integrity in a world that too often demands silence. In a rare, emotional interview, James's former colleague, Terrence Hill, broke down. "I stayed quiet for too long. I wish I'd gone back for him that night. No one deserves to be forgotten like James." His confession resonated deeply, sparking hope that the final pieces of the puzzle might yet come to light even if so much time has passed. Throughout the long years searching for her son, Marlene has never stopped hoping. Each year on June 22nd, she posts the same message on her social media today. "My son, James Coleman, is still missing. If you know anything, please speak up." Her words are shared thousands of times, reaching justice groups, missing persons advocates, and communities across America. Strangers have come to her doorstep, leaving flowers, lighting candles, offering prayers from a hidden tragedy. James' story became a symbol for hundreds of missing Black men and women whom society too often ignores, those who never make the national headlines, who rarely inspire a public outcry for justice. On the 10th anniversary of James' disappearance, the entire Westview neighborhood went dark, lighting thousands of candles along the street leading to the fire station. A young journalist captured the haunting scene and posted it online with a single question: "Have we done enough to protect those who risk everything to save us?" The photo and caption went viral, shared by millions. And once again, James Coleman's name was on everyone's lips. Still, the case remains unsolved. Atlanta police admit the trail has gone cold, too few leads, too many fearful witnesses. But the community refuses to give up. Silent marches continue. New articles keep the story alive. And James' name is spoken again and again as a reminder that justice comes only when we all demand it together. And now, I want to ask you, yes, you watching this video, what do you think really happened the night James stepped into that burning warehouse? Did he make it out of the fire? Or did he never stand a chance? Comment justice for James if you believe he deserves to be found. Subscribe to the channel and share this story so we don't let people like James be forgotten. Because as long as one person remembers his name, James Coleman will never truly disappear.